Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Wilson. I'm the Director of Programming Advocacy with New England Museum Association. And thanks so much for joining us for today's conversation with our environmental community of practice. I'm going to hand it over to Heather to introduce herself on NEMA's side, and then we'll hand it over to Paul.
I'm Heather Riggs here at NEMA, Director of Administration. Always happy to be joining this group. And I'm going to lead it over to Paul, who's going solo today.
Great, thanks, folks. Welcome back to folks who I recognize a lot of the faces. Welcome to folks that this may be their first environment community practice meeting. So I'm Paul Fenton. I am the Director of Environmental and Outdoor Education at Discovery Museum in Acton. We're a science-based children's museum and co-facilitator of this community practice, along with Matt Kirkman, exhibit developer and NEMA board member, who cannot join us today because he is either on Nantucket or in a storm off the coast. He's in the environment, as we were saying, experiencing the wilds out there. So the purpose of today's meeting, the way that our meetings have kind of gone, and Matt and I are continuing to try to listen to the community and recalibrate based on what folks are wanting from this group, is we've had sort of what we've been calling kind of a working meeting, or one that just Matt and I sort of facilitate, and then we've been getting a variety of guest speakers to come and talk to the NEMA community. So today, we're going to look at some of the resources that Matt and I have put together, and where to find those resources and how to kind of think about that stuff, to have a moment for everyone to react and to provide feedback on, are there things that we should be doing differently? Are there other things that we should be doing? And then I think we'll probably have some time left over. I don't think that will take the full hour. And so I thought that we could also kind of have what I think folks have found valuable in the past is sort of like what are you feeling challenged with right now in your work as it relates to sustainability or environment or climate? What are some successes maybe that you've had over the last 6 to 8 months? And we can kind of just have that open conversation and do a little brain trust. Before I get going, excuse me, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please join us next month. We will have a guest speaker. Leah Glasser and Ethan Yankura are going to be talking about the history of energy. Leah literally wrote the book on interpreting energy in historic houses. She did a great session at conference in November. So please come and join us for that if you're available. And then I will send this note out to the broader group, but if you are interested in being a guest speaker, we think that there probably is a lot of expertise within the group. So think about that. If you're interested, reach out to me, reach out to Matt. I can drop my email in the chat at some point. If I forget, please remind me. And we'd love to have a variety of different opinions and positions and work and thoughts about this stuff, because what I think that we find is that everyone, I mean, this is true across the board, but everyone's an expert in their own life experience and their own work, right? And so I think we also like to highlight work that is maybe just starting, or what pitfalls did you encounter? What did you do that went really well? Those kinds of things. So anyway, think about that. If you want to join us to kind of talk about anything that you're doing at your museum, you can let us know. All right, so I'm going to share my screen if I can. I think I can, because I think I'm a co-host. Cool. And we're going to take a look if I can navigate my screen now that it's shared. You see my sweet dimetrodon there. How do I do this? There we go. Okay. So we're going to look at, how do I see? I was just like riffing on people that don't know how to do this in 2024, and now I don't know how to do it. The problem I'm having is that the bar is now up and it's blocking my web browser. So I'm trying to figure out how do I get to the top of my web browser. Oh, wow. I'm really eating my own words here, folks. This is riveting content.
I think there's a place to click that
There we
says
go.
like hide the something or other.
Okay, yeah, probably there is, but here we go. We figured it out, kind of. All right, so to find this folder, if you go into the community of practice within the NEMA portal, right at the top here, so this is like where the feed is, where you see all the messages from folks. There's just a link right here, the climate and environment community of practice Google Drive. So you just click on that, and that will bring you to this folder. And so what we have set up so far, and again, this is based on sort of about a year or so's worth of conversations and feedback and kind of trying things out and continuing to collect feedback. But this is what we have so far. In the main folder, our charter is still in draft form. We should probably kind of take a look at that at some point and make sure everything's kind of buttoned up. We also have a document with some of our meeting recordings. So we've been specifically, especially we've been trying to make sure that we're recording our guest speakers so that people can go back to those and check them out if they are not available to join live. And then the sort of meat of it, what we've been trying to collect for folks are what we call case studies and resources. So case studies are work being done by you all and our colleagues. Most of this is New England focused. I think it may be entirely New England focused. So inside the folder, we're going to see an Excel sheet. And in that Excel sheet, we've got these different case studies. So it's the name of the museum or the person doing the work, the name or description of the project, and then a link to some kind of web presence for that work, so you can learn a little bit more about it. One, I guess, thought that Matt had, one question is, does this need to be more like a one-page PDF? Do we want a little bit more detail? How do we know if we want to click those links and figure out? So you can kind of put that in the back of your mind if you have feedback about whether you think this format works for you, or if you would like a little bit more detail before you go into those web links. So those are the case studies. So if we navigate back to the main public folder, again, we do have meeting notes. So we've had various degrees of success with capturing meeting notes, but again, we are trying to record as much as possible as well. And then, like I said, what I've been calling resources. So some of these resources are PDFs. So these are the documents that you can find, directly right in here. Our sustainable exhibition toolkit is a big one. And then this document, we've been collecting additional resources. So web resources, right? Madison Children's Museum's really great, green exhibit guide. This is all, again, it's kind of broken out into topics, exhibits, collections management and preservation, some different conferences that are related to sustainability or specifically museums and sustainability, resources on infrastructure. So these are probably familiar to folks, but LEED and other things that can help us either think about or get certified in certain ways, some funding opportunities, some organizations that think about sustainability and environment. Some of the
Paul, quick question. Can anybody just
Yeah.
add to the Google Drive and the resources that you've created already?
Yeah, so currently it is set up so that I believe anyone who gets here can actually just add to these documents. So that'd be a question moving forward is, how do we, if we want this to be completely open, community curated, I tend to be sort of for that way of approaching things. But also, right, how do we also make sure it's not kind of getting to be too much to process, things are being vetted and curated. So I think right, like I said, right now, I believe it is set so that if you land here, you can edit it and add to it. Last two, I think, oh no, there's a couple more topics, but you get the gist, you get the idea. So I think, again, the question here is sort of like, I think the big one for me is this enough information about these things? Is it easy to I mean, for now, there's like not a ton of stuff, so I think it's relatively easy to browse, but is it easy to find like what is relevant to you? If you open this up, does that work for folks? And then the last thing I will share before I open it up for some conversation is that one additional document I put in here is, this is again based on something that I've heard other folks ask about, is a sort of template for a sustainability plan. Folks who have been to some of these meetings have heard me talk about the Discovery Museum has a pretty comprehensive sustainability plan and team, which I'm very proud of. So this is sort of based on that work, but also just like my understanding of what work would need to happen in order to move your museums into a greener, more sustainable direction. Great. So I'm actually just going to stop sharing so I can see everyone again, and would love to hear folks' thoughts, feedback, etc. Is this sounding good to folks? Do folks have any suggestions? Is it useful? Is it, again, are there tweaks that we should be thinking about that would make it more useful? What are your thoughts? And I did see there were a couple of things in the chat here.
Paul, going back to the question of resources and who puts material in and how is it vetted and everything. I'm not sure if you implied that maybe anybody who gets into that material can edit it themselves or add things to subtract things. I mean, that sounds pretty dangerous. You have to assume that everyone's going to put in material that's truthful to begin with.
Yeah, I mean,
that nobody's going to make a mistake and delete something or change something by mistake.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that right. So I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about this, but like, I think I am sort of running under, right. I think it probably is easy enough to make it so that people have access to it, but don't maybe have editing permission. We could collect them. Matt and I can collect additions that people want to make, and we can put them in. I don't know. I also think that like, I kind of trust people. Like I said, I tend to be somebody who is like wanting the broadest sort of community input on projects. But I totally hear, I absolutely hear you're right. It can be a little bit dangerous to make sure that like things aren't accidentally being deleted. That's a valid point. But I'm really curious to hear. Yeah, Bob, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure. So as someone who's fairly new to these conversations, I'm just curious as to the origins of compiling these resources and, what got this conversation started.
Mhm.
And I'll let you know that I'm sitting in on this out of curiosity. I, work in a place that's nine buildings and what used to be an alleyway all combined into one. We take up an entire city block. We have more than one heating system and HVAC system, and it's complicated, of course. So I'm just, um, so I'm curious about all of that. What got this going, and what's the hope for it?
Yeah, great
Thank
question.
you.
And maybe I'll try to do, because I know some folks have in the Zoom space with us have been with us like pretty much since the beginning. So I'll try to do as concise but thorough a job answering, because it hopefully it's helpful for folks that are newer. Right. So the story really starts like before the pandemic, when Dan Yeager led a couple of sessions on museums and climate. They were those sort of think tank style sessions where we had some really, really great conversations. But coming out of those, I really wanted to see if we could figure out a way to have more conversations more frequently and like take action more, because talking about climate is great and we should continue to do more of it. And my favorite climate action fact is actually that having conversations about climate change has a direct impact on the amount of carbon dioxide that gets emitted. If you want to learn more about that, please hit me up. But right, I wanted to do more, right? And so about, let's see, I started Discovery about 2 years ago almost now. And when I started my job there, me and my supervisor, who's also on the NEMA board, and Matt, we finally kind of, and the NEMA staff, of course, we kind of got the ball rolling finally on this idea of a community practice around environment and climate issues that relate to museum work. So the sort of first like official thing that we did was that Matt and I led a session at NEMA 2022, and we kind of had this like conversation about like, do we leave it completely open-ended? Basically in that session we wanted to learn what people wanted from a community practice, right? And we were like, do we leave it completely open-ended? And we landed with like, well, we got to put like some structure on it, so that people have, something to react to. And so we put a little bit of structure on it, but we tried to also leave it so that we could get, again, as much feedback and new ideas as possible. And so the idea of we want case studies, right? We want to see who's doing the good work out in the world. I want to see examples so that that can maybe help me think about what is applicable from that to my museum. That came out of that. We want, this makes a lot of sense, right? Like we want to be able to be pointed to funding opportunities, right? We all know that money is a huge part of this. It's a huge part of all of our operations in the museum world, and getting funding, especially when it's, really, again, if you funding opportunity to like build solar panels or something like that, like that's something that would be exciting for folks, right? So let's try to have those resources and try to deliver them to people. We also heard people saying, and this is still kind of in the works, we want some kind of an award system or recognition, right? We want to be able to elevate folks who are doing really, really good work. It's sort of like a super case study in a way. So anyway, I think those are the things that we've heard. And then through the last year or so, 2 years almost, Matt and I have continued to try to think about, again, like how these meetings have gone, the feedback that we've been getting, and adjust kind of what we're doing based on that. So again, hopefully that answers the question and was as concise as possible for folks that have heard that story. Been part of that story.
Safe to say that it's, I don't know if I'm summarizing this correctly. So it's how a museum is managing its own internal climate and how it in the even materials used for exhibitions as a way of minimizing the museum's impact on the environment around it and the environment in general, or the climate in general.
Right. So there's two or maybe more than two pieces, right? In my thinking that, well, I think they're right. There's two and a half. There's the like infrastructure piece, right? Like you said, your HVAC system. How are you heating your buildings? How are you cooling your buildings? And like your exhibits, right? Yeah, like what materials are you choosing? That kind of stuff, right? There's the just like physical stuff and how that stuff impacts the environment, right? And we want to, as a community, get better, make better choices, more sustainable choices, with the very real understanding that it's not always easy and it's not always cheap. Then there's the public engagement piece, right? Which like that's something that I love to think about, because that's like, I mean, I'm an educator. I love talking to people about talking about climate change. And I especially love talking to art and history folks about how they might be able to bring more environment or climate or both messaging to their audiences, because I think we should all be doing this. Anyway, so there's those two. And then the third, or the half of one, is the sort of staff training or education or support systems, right? Like how do we think about, so as an example, staff meetings at Discovery Museum, I've now been given a couple of minutes every staff meeting to talk about like a thing that you can do, not at the museum, but like in your life. So as a way to like recycling, like everyone, I do it too. Like I make mistakes all the time. Like everyone's terrible at recycling, right? Like but can we develop systems that help our staffs live both within the walls of the museum, but also as just individual humans? Like, can we help our staff understand these complex dynamics a little bit better? So those are sort of the three main goals or intentions, I think, of our community of practice. And again, as I offered the opportunity today to learn from each other, to talk to each other, to have this ongoing conversation about like, what are you doing? What's working? What's not working? So
Paul, I dropped as a question in the chat. So
sure.
are we thinking also about, are we also talking about climate resilience? I mean, for some of us coastal museums, we're trying to do better to prevent more climate change, but we're also immediately dealing with having to think about climate resilience planning and impacts of climate change.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I know that like I don't know a ton of the details, but I know that's like Strawberry Bank is like one of their main things. And I know that, right, like, so sorry, the short answer is yes, right? Like, and I think it looks a little bit different. What I was going to try to get into is like examples of how on the coast with sea level rise, it's very obvious, but there are ways in which I think all of our museums and our individual lives are impacted by climate change to a greater or lesser degree. The planet's warmed. It's 1.5 C warmer than it was 200 years ago, and that affects everything. But so anyway, the short answer, Julia, is yes.
Can I just make a comment? Historic New England just in September had our board vote to approve a climate action commitment. And I just wondered if any other organization is working that way. The staff are very involved and very enthusiastic about pursuing this, but we got the board to sign on, and it's become a guideline for everybody, and it's something that staff are asked to look at on day-to-day basis when they're looking at projects, when they're looking at planning, from climate issues to not selling small little plastic bottles of water. I just wondered if anyone else was looking at working at the board level and getting that commitment there, and how that worked.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'll check that out later, and I'm curious to learn more about that. I know that we did a similar thing. Like I said, so our sustainability plan is like this big document. It's very comprehensive, but then more recently, we developed a very short, like, Discovery Museum is committed to blah 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 blah, like, and that was approved by the board, and now it's like on our website and like goes out on social media periodically and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm curious, any other examples of something like that in the Zoom space?
Let's see. Ours was super, like, we're just starting, but we worked through some new mission and visioning and values statements, and we have a social responsibility statement that includes I'll read it, the sentence that says, we see the effects of climate change in our local community and around the world, and we are committed to becoming a sustainable organization as part of the solution. So that was a board that was developed through board and staff work and board approved. It's just that one sentence. So we're still working on, like, what does that actually look like on the ground? But at least the board, and this is actually the funny thing is the facilitator and I kept using sustainability and resilience and all these nice words that get people less anxious than climate change. And then we had one trustee that was like, why aren't you just saying climate change? And we said, well, because you're trustees. We don't use words like climate change with trustees. And so it actually came from a board member to say, well, we actually have to say climate change in here. So that was exciting.
Hi everyone, I'm Marnie at RISD in Providence. I don't actually know if our boards, do you know, Ingrid? I don't know if our board approved it, but we actually have a climate statement on our website and goals and action plan. That was one of the things I was going to put into your case study, just so you can see everything that we've been doing at RISD. We have it written into our planning documents. We have decision-making tools. We have it in our exhibition contracts. We talk with artists about it all the time. So it's something that we're weaving into all of the work that we do, from exhibitions to programming to event, like just across the board, but not actually to our board. So that we actually wrote a note. I'm like, do we have a board commitment? So I'm actually going to check and see if we actually asked our board that we're going to do it. I think we just told them that we're doing this. They have to get on or not. But we use the term climate emergency in our plan because it's very urgent, and we are all really passionate about having that be more actionable than more passive.
Paul, to bring it back to the resources, have you thought about including a section on material sourcing and vendors? I don't know if that gets too into favoritism, but I find that that's something that I've been looking for in my work, and I'm at the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, and we are working on an artist installation right now that actually opens in next month in April, and the artist wanted to pretty much exclusively use recycled materials. And so we went through this process of like finding different vendors and different sources for materials, and I can imagine others may have similar projects or challenges that they're working on.
Yes. So the two things that come immediately to my mind are, so, right, okay. I have not, so sorry, keep interrupting myself. I've been working on a draft exhibits guide for my museum. And one of the comments that my supervisor made on the first round was, do we need a list of vendors that we can get these materials from? And my first reaction is, there's two things that I'll say. One is Madison Children's Museum and that Green Museum exhibits website. They have put a ton of work into exactly what you're asking for, I think. So I also will say that, like, I am not an exhibits person. That's not my background. I have been sort of pressed into service as an exhibits person in my current role, but I don't have a ton of experience working with materials, thinking about these things. Like, I come at it from, like, I know about what can be composted and what can be, like, I always use the term actually recycled, because folks probably know, but like most plastics can't actually be recycled, right? So I come at it from this sort of like knowledge of materials from the world of climate and sustainability. So they've done a ton of work. Also in the Zoom room is Cameron Slocum, who has also put a lot of work into both collecting resources for sustainable materials, and also doing creating sustainable exhibits. Cameron, I'm not sure if you're there, if you want to come on mic and say anything about what you've done.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. I just have bad Wi-Fi, so
Good.
camera's off. Yeah, I did as part of my kind of capstone project at UConn, I did a sustainable pop-up exhibit, kind of exploring sustainable materials and design methods, and then also trying to educate people at UConn on those, because there isn't much of an education curriculum about sustainability at UConn that I found in the industrial design field. So I had that up at UConn for a semester. It's now in my garage in storage, waiting for another location. But yeah, I did a lot of research, and then after I did the physical exhibit, I made the website to kind of share the resources and my process and what I learned. Just to, I guess, kind of try to, I don't know, I feel like sustainability can be such a hard thing to pin down and figure out what actions are most sustainable. So trying to share what I learned and learn from other people. And that's why I love these databases of resources.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So, right, so her website is one of the case studies, and her database of materials is in the resources. So I would check both of those out.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Since we just mentioned the case studies spreadsheet, I think it would be great if there was like one additional column that was just like type of project, so you could put like exhibit or sustainability plan or whatever, almost like those categories in the resource document, just so it's easier to identify.
Easy. Thank you. Yep.
Or creating, I don't know if that's would be useful, but we always talk at the RISD Museum about reusing crates. Everyone, I mean, very few people can store their crates. It would be nice. I don't know if it's feasible, but and I think Tara Emsley, our loan registrar, has been working on this, where she measures the crates, and then you can make them available. Maybe someone else could use the crate, right, for shipping something. I don't know if that's too onerous, if it's like way too big a chunk to think about handling, but it's just, when you're talking about categorizing the resources, I don't know, it's a possibility maybe. I mean, the amount of wood and everything that goes into these crates. And then we used to, I think, Marnie, in the old days, I believe we used to sort of make them available to students or whatever, we would give them away. I don't think we really do that anymore. We don't really have a dumpster. Anyway, but who wants to throw them in the dumpster anyway? It'd be better to share them somehow. Maybe that would be a long-term goal. I don't know.
Ingrid, I think there's a resource like that in DC. I think a lot of the museums in DC have like this like shared thing that they do between like crates and cases and things like that. And I was like, New England is so tiny, like maybe we could do that too. I should also say I'm not volunteering to organize that because I have too many jobs.
Well, no, I can, there's a Washington Conservation Guild that I used to be a part of, and it's the conservators and so forth. they have regular meetings, and it's like our equivalent. We have the New England Conservation Association. I could reach out to someone at WCG, the Washington Conservation Guild, and find out who the contact is for that. I could do that.
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, my sense, I'm like trying to remember because I thought there was an organization that did something similar to that, but that, you know, I go back to the Madison Children's Museum because they've been doing this work for a super long time, and they've really I mean, they hadn't solved it, but they've just been doing it for so long now that it's part of their practice. But so, like, for example, like one of the things that they do is right, they save their pallets, right, and it's a similar, right, so it's and then they use them to like build if they need like I remember seeing them build like a set of risers out of old pallets, right, and they and not just that, but like they actually have staff who, if I understand correctly, like basically their entire job is to find reclaimable materials in the world and like go and look at them in real life and decide like, is this something we think we want? And then bring it back to the museum. But that means they need storage, right? Like they're storing a bunch of objects, not the typical museum objects, but stuff that they're like, we might, it's like boomer, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. It's like my parents who are like, well, we might need it someday, but like for good, right? Like for like, because like if we can make more stuff out of reclaimed materials, that's great. But like, again, my point is like, this is, I think, a very worthy idea. And I'm not sure, I think it's going to take like it would be, I'm right there with you. I think it would take a strong collaboration. And like, you know, maybe it's something that down the road NEMA could help us figure out. But I think it's going to take, it takes space. I think that's the big, for us anyway, at Discovery, we have no space, zero, everything's full. As soon as we clear out a space, something else goes there.
Yeah, the same with us too. And taking over a space also has a carbon footprint. So like, how do you make that balance
really good
between
point,
like, we
Renee.
have a storage space, even if it's not climate controlled for these sort of things, it's still energy being used.
Right, building a building has a carbon footprint. That's a really good point, Marnie. And Julia, I did just to say out loud, I did see your note in the comments about changing the name of the folder, and that's an easy one. Can do. Any other feedback? So I guess I'll ask. Gotten a little bit of feedback on some minor tweaks. Do folks see themselves looking at this, using it? Is this valuable? Seeing some head nods. That's great. That's great. Okay. That was sort of like baseline. I was like, we're doing this. I hope people like it or want to use it. So that's great. And thank you for folks who have provided feedback. So I'll kind of leave it. I'll do some more wait time if anybody has any more feedback, and then we can kind of wrap up this afternoon with some successes, challenges, which we've alluded to a little bit already. But any other points of feedback for me before we move on?
I just have one other question, and I'm kind of new to this group, so apologies if this is something that's already known. But you mentioned that this is available through the NEMA portal. Is there another way to find out that this even exists? Because I think if you're new to the space, it can be very overwhelming to figure out where to even start. And I'm just curious kind of where the visibility or how would someone who's trying to get involved find this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would love for my NEMA staffer friends to help me weigh in on that one, because as I it's available if you know me or Matt, right? Like it's available if you've been to one of these meetings. It's like there are like theoretically other ways, but maybe not a super public facing way. But yeah, Heather.
The public facing way would be to have it on our website, but it means finding it on our website as well. Unfortunately, a lot of these types of resources are more word of mouth. It's not the way I would like to go, but we can put something on the website referencing it. I would rather not have just an open link to this resource. So that's why the link is actually in the portal. So if you're an employee of a member museum, you are able to take out a free membership through the institutional affiliate membership program, which means that you can log into the NEMA portal to get that link and stuff like that, or just email one of us as well. And then if you do have any hiccups logging in, definitely email one of us. We'll be more than happy to help you find the resources and stuff.
Thank you. Speaking just for myself, I think some sort of public reference to it even existing would be really helpful, and could encourage folks, if they're not NEMA members, to maybe they should become.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources on our website. I'm just going to put it out there. But we could definitely reference it on. I think we do have an environmental one that needs to be updated, but we can definitely put something on there now.
Yeah, I think it's good. I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind too, Molly. I appreciate the feedback, because I think well, right. It's that I'm putting, Matt and I are putting work into it, but it's also that like this came out of me wanting to help people learn more and do more of this work, right? And so obviously, like, I'm not just doing this to do the work. I want people to use it. So it's definitely worth thinking about.
I put in a plug for really asking people at museums to contribute to the case studies.
Yeah.
Because that's where things get more personal. I mean, it's one thing to have a list of email links and resources. It's another thing to have the ability of someone to look into the case studies and say, we've got this problem now, and who might have encountered this before. And there might be several different case studies that address that. And it's a way of getting people able to talk to each other. The person who's had to address it, and did it work or not, talking with a person that's just developed this similar kind of problem and choice to make.
I completely agree. I think one thing that I've heard this afternoon that I really appreciate is if these documents are not editable by the public at large, which maybe that is not the way to go, then being a little bit more and again, like I sort of did this in my invitation to come and speak to the community of practice, but being more overt about invitations to add to the case studies. And I totally hear, like, I completely agree too that, like, hearing the stories of, like, how did it go, and what were the, like, what hiccups did you encounter, and was there, you know, did you have to get buy-in from certain constituencies and all that stuff? Like, I think that's, and like, how did you navigate that and stuff? I think those are really valuable for folks. Cool.
So Paul, if we have resources and things like that, should we just put those documents in there?
You can, or you can send them to me, and I'm putting
Okay.
my email in the chat right now. But yes, if it is currently editable, I trust the folks in the Zoom room to not make a mess of things. Or again, feel free to just shoot me an email and I'll add them.
Plus, the nice thing about a Google Doc is you can back version it. If something does go wrong, you can recover previous versions of it pretty easily.
That's a good point, Julia. I did that recently because I made an oopsie, and was like, oh man, wow, you can really, like, it's got it all just, like, recorded. So that's kind of cool.
Well, I think they have to, because you don't save, right? So, like, you're, like, making changes, and then it's like that change is already made, so you have to be able to
go back. Yeah. Good. We've got about 10 more minutes left together this afternoon. I'd love to hear if there are any small successes that folks have had over the last, whatever time period you want to think about, 6 months, 8 months, a year, whenever. I'm happy to hear about challenges as well, but I always love to hear about those small wins.
I try to be patient about talking. I'm an over talker, but so it's been exciting. It's been fun here. We're a small museum with multiple historic buildings on the ocean. Like our shoreline is washing away in January. We got some damage, not horrendous, but some. But we've been really involved in the community conversations around climate change and resilience. So rather than, we are looking for opportunities to interpret sustainability and climate on our campus. But we hosted a community panel of community resilience folks, and that's on our YouTube. That panel is on our YouTube channel, and the town is partly because there was already the town's comprehensive plan is in its final stages, and it has a climate change sustainability chapter. It talks about climate resilience for historic properties in town and the historic preservation part of the comprehensive plan, and the folks that doing that kind of work in town have been really welcoming to have myself and other folks from the museum, primarily me, be part of those community groups that are working around climate change and sustainability and resilience, which is neat because it's bridging sectors, right? Because we as our 5-acre campus can't fix it, but if we're part of what the whole community is doing, our whole town is doing, and the region is doing, it's going to be more impactful. So it's been interesting to continue to be welcomed into those spaces where the community is having conversations about it. And those, the urgency of those has ramped up because the January on the coast, January 10th and January 13th storms were so devastating in so many places and took out historic structures and were hammering, with properties and infrastructure and so on. So that the idea that we were having this gradual, so that sea level rise was the problem, and it was going to be like in 2030 the sea level is going to be here. It's like, okay, so in January the sea level was 4 feet higher than we thought it was going to be in 20 years. So it really kicked things into gear, and as kind of adjacent to that, we're going to be working with a consultant to bring a consultant in to do training for us, our staff, and other organizations in the area on dialogue and interpretation and facilitated dialogue. And the dialogue we're going to be developing as the practice during that training is a dialogue around climate change and how do museums and history organizations talk about climate change. So we'll see. We'll share outcomes of that when it gets to it. But
that all feels like a pretty big success to me. That's great. I think I was just at the museum Massachusetts Environmental Education Society conference yesterday, and a lot of conversations that I was in were about environmental educators and municipal entities and et cetera. Like, we just need to join forces. And it's easy to say that, and that's not literally all we need to do, but like, if we can do more of that, I think we'll really strengthen this work. That's great, Julia. This isn't necessarily a new thing, but I'll just share that I'm very excited about the fact that we started offering compost collection for our visitors about a year ago, and it's been going great. It's been very easy to manage. It's just become part of our sort of standard facilities and visitor experience. So if you're curious, if you're thinking about it, I encourage you to think more about it or talk to me about it.
Excuse me, Paul, I didn't understand your first sentence. What are you offering to your visitors?
Compost collection. So when they're eating their meals, we have little compost containers that they can put their organic material in, and like very little contamination. Just been wildly surprised and pleased by how well it's been going. So any other little wins, small successes, or frustrations in our last couple of minutes together.
Well, perhaps these two will fall into into the categories. So one of the things we did a few years ago is change out as many incandescent bulbs as possible to put in LEDs, which of course create less heat and take up less energy and last a lot longer. And that was something that we did, God, maybe eight years ago, or we started back then. And in terms of exhibitions, some of the things or some of the artists that we invite have a focus on climate. So there's I'll call him a photojournalist, a guy named Jeffrey Beckton, who's based in Maine. And he takes lots and lots of photos and has an incredible gift with using Photoshop and other ways to manipulate photos to create exactly the image he wants. And the 2 dozen or so photos he has on display right now all focus on potential climate damage. And you see houses and with this really weird water level halfway up a window, even though the water hasn't come through the house, you can see it back there. And it certainly gets people discussing the topic. And coming up, we have another artist who is now, I think, on faculty at Brown, and her focus is working with the community to take plastics and make lots and lots of things that look like jelly animals. And then she's been here a couple of nights during the spring. Community comes in and these kids just make all these jelly creatures, and we'll be putting those on display sometime late year. And some of those will be on these little motors so these things will be moving around the room. So we're trying to use a couple of galleries to get conversations going on these topics.
That's great, because like I said, even just starting conversations about climate is still, it's very important right now. And
if it's not clear, the NBWM stands for New Bedford Whaling Museum.
Good. Anyone else want to share? I'm a teacher. I can wait forever. It's okay.
I do want to say one thing before we wrap up, though.
Yeah,
The NEMA call for proposals for our conference in Newport in November is due March 29th. So we do have 2 sessions if you want to brainstorm with other people to submit something. I'm really hoping people from this group submit stuff because it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of great work. So
Great. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much. I really, truly, genuinely appreciate everyone's input and brains and conversation and feedback on what we've been working on. And shoot me an email, whether you have something that you want to contribute or if you have more feedback, if something pops into your head later, please be in touch. Happy to answer questions and talk about any of this stuff. Love talking about this stuff. So thank you. Great to see folks. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.
thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.